Today I have a guest with me on the channel. He's a grad student at Harvard University studying bio and nanoengineering. He holds 2 patents in regenerative medicine. He's been featured by the American Society of Mechanical Engineers for his work on 3D printing bones, and he co-hosts the Breaking Bad Science podcast. Mr. D.R. Cox. Danny, welcome. Thanks for coming on the channel and for being willing to come talk about the upcoming COVID vaccines, which will be out when, do you think?
So I think that most likely we will start seeing the vulnerable population being immunized late December, early January. I mean, if you look at the UK, they've already begun, right? Pfizer has begun their immunizations, and Canada just approved the same vaccine. So the interesting thing about vaccines is we have different ways to sort of stimulate the immune system with these vaccines, and both Moderna and Pfizer are actually using a novel concept of mRNA delivery that can stimulate the immune system differently than what we've been doing in the past.
I mean, so this sounds like something that if you go into it, I can make I was going to say nice cartoon, but functional illustration at least. How does that differ? What is the mechanism through which this is working?
With historical vaccines, what we've done a lot of times is take a virus, make sure it's inactive so that it can no longer infect the cell, and then present that to the immune system. It looks exactly like the virus would, but it's not infective, so the immune system learns to recognize it. Essentially, what you're doing is you're stimulating that immune system to be able to respond much more quickly. Yeah. And the way we used to do that is through these killed viruses or something that looks kind of like the virus. In this new case, what we've done is we're taking a small protein that's a part of the virus. We're getting a cell to produce it for a brief amount of time, and then it shows up in the body. The immune system recognizes that, and then if that protein ever shows up again, the immune system can respond very quickly.
One of the things that I have managed to hear, even at the level that I've looked into it, is that, oh, do you really want to put a deactivated virus into your body? How do you know it's deactivated? You're just infecting yourself. And you're saying that this isn't even doing that. It's just taking a functional part to say, hey, body, here's this thing you should look out for. It's like training in virtual reality or something. So then when you see this thing, but it can't actually even do anything on its own because it's not the whole part.
Right. And the way we're doing that is, and that's sort of the interesting thing. A lot of people are concerned, I think, about the introduction of genetic material. But essentially what you're introducing is an RNA that has no capability of getting into the nucleus and has no capability of integrating into your DNA. All it's going to do is, they have these things from high school biology called ribosomes. They're just this ball, essentially, that's going to translate RNA into protein, right? And so all this does is get into the cell, run through the ribosomes a few times, and then disappear. It just breaks down, just like any other messenger RNA. So you've got this brief time that you produce this protein that you want, and then it breaks down and disappears.
So essentially, you're telling the cell to play act for a little bit, and it will then recognize a situation in the future, but it's not actually becoming a thing, and there's, in fact, no way for it to do that.
Yeah, it's impossible. It doesn't have the genetic material required.
How do you get side effects then?
Yeah, so side effects are sort of an interesting thing, and if you look at the data that is in this 53-page document, you'll see that adverse effects exist in both the placebo group and the test group. And part of that is because some of the adverse effects are related to the placebo effect. You got injected into your arm with something, and that makes your arm hurt, right? And that happens in both groups. All you're looking for is it significantly worse in one group than the other? Because if it is, then it's more than just the thought process that says, hey, I got injected, my arm should hurt, right?
Or if you're looking for a headache, you find a headache.
Right. Yeah. Or a headache. Right. So, and those are all self-reported, right?
Sure.
And so the other thing is some people are more susceptible to headaches than others. And so again, you're comparing the general population that got a placebo to those who were actually given the vaccine. Is there, higher instance of people who are like, yeah, my head hurts. And what you'll find in this case is there do seem to be higher instances of things like headache and some slight fever and things like that. But that's because you are stimulating the immune system. So one thing some people don't realize is that a bacteria, a virus, does not cause you to get a fever. You do not have a fever because you have the bacteria. You have a fever because you're fighting off the bacteria. That is an immune response mechanism. And so some of these adverse events, some of these things that you're looking at are the immune response that you're producing.
So a fever is not the broken window, a fever is the alarm going off.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. That's a great way to put it.
Granted, I've heard a lot of stuff from a lot of people who don't know what the hell they're talking about. So there is a lot of bubbles being created around this for echo chambers. But one of the things that is echoing around those chambers is talk of some of the quote severe side effects that have happened in some of these trials so far. Have we seen any of that you think is at all attributable to any safety concern about these vaccines?
The only thing I've seen that's particularly interesting was the Pfizer finding once they started injecting or immunizing the community, was that 2 people actually did have an allergic reaction. And while that's not a concern, if allergic reactions can occur, it was surprising. It wasn't something that was seen in the test or in the phase trial. Wow. And I think a large part of that is because this was associated with people who already have severe allergic reactions regularly. There are just some people who have an immune imbalance that causes hypersensitivity to virtually anything. And so in the rare case where those types of people exist, there can be concern.
Do you have any concerns about the prevalence rate of that, or do you think that is something that it will be limited to a very small section of the population? And what is a very small section of the population?
Well, we know that, in the trials, 40,000 people, over 40,000 people were injected, and this hadn't been seen, right? And it wasn't until large-scale distribution that we've now seen 2. They started heavily distributing it very quickly, I'm sure. And so, you're talking about a large number of people, and so far you've seen it twice. So I think that we can reasonably assume that 1 in tens of thousands is a pretty rare scenario. And this is a very, very treatable condition. These people are fine.
Right. One of the other things I hear about why people don't want to take this, and this is a phenomena. I was looking the other day, and it was like 44% of firefighters in this fairly large district said that they wouldn't take it. And I'll have to put actual numbers on the screen because I'm just winging it on that one. But the link to the real article and the actual numbers will appear on the screen now. They're worried about long-term effects. This was a rushed process. This hasn't been tested enough that we don't know what the long-term effects of these vaccines are. How much credibility will you give to that critique?
Well, it's hard not to look at that. Vaccines in general, 2 to 3 year follow-up data is not only common, it's expected. So vaccines don't usually get approved without that sort of long-term data. And so we're living in a different world with this, right? We don't have 2 to 3 years to wait for follow-up data. And so we have to make some concessions with that. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at previous vaccine studies. How have they looked on, at the early stages? How have they looked when they went on to not, do well in year 2 and year 3? How have they looked when they did look good in year 2 and year 3?
Trajectory.
We need to be as close to that as possible.
Analogy and metaphor can always be suspect, but trying to make that more digestible, what you're saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I have a ball and I throw it 10,000 times, and it basically goes to the same place every time. Then I get another object that is not a tennis ball, the thing I've thrown 10,000 times, but it weighs about the same and it's round. And that should give me some confidence that if I throw it in the same way, it will probably go to the same place. Is that essentially what we're saying here?
Yeah, and that's the target you're trying to hit, right? But at the same time, there is, absolute credence to the idea of not having the long-term data. But when we look at the argument of rushing it, I don't think that people are understanding that the way that they should.
So let's talk about that, because they're doing something quickly versus doing something in a rushed manner might not be the same thing. And so how did this vaccine get developed so quickly, if not by cutting corners?
Yeah, so I think that's an absolutely great question. And I really hope people start to understand this better, because the FDA itself is not a well-funded organization. Every time you give the FDA a document, you can expect 3 to 6 months before you're going to get a response from them. 3 to 6 months. And in some cases, you can't move forward until you've gotten a response. That doesn't happen here. The moment, some person is working at their desk in the FDA and someone says, hey, I need you to review this document for COVID, they put it right on top of what they were doing, and they stand there and watch them till it's done.
It's a relay where no one's just sitting there waiting for the next person to take the baton. They're just like, I got it, let's go.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that a similar, how much does gathering the populations to do these tests, how long does that add time to the trials as well? And is that where we picked up time in this case as well?
Yeah, and so a lot of times vaccine candidates are harder to find in these types of scenarios, because one of the things you need to be in is a vulnerable population. For like a norovirus vaccine, a good candidate group is a military base. And so you need to get approval into a military base, do all your vaccines. And then if a breakout doesn't happen, you don't get any data. Well, that's not a problem that we have with COVID, right? We can go into anywhere in the world, and tomorrow we probably have an outbreak in that area.
And probably we brought some with us, especially if you're coming from here. How effective are these vaccines?
This is where we're in a crazy space. The FDA was looking for hopefully 50% effective, and that would be good for vaccines. When we look at the Moderna and Pfizer data, it's in the above 90%. And I've now looked at the numbers myself, and it calculates exactly that. They are above 90%. It means that if you have two groups of people, one set has been vaccinated, another has not, and you see 100 cases of COVID, 95 of them, 90+% are in the non-vaccinated group, and 5% or 10% are in the vaccinated group. The way you look at these is 90% of the people who get the disease are now those who aren't vaccinated. You're going to test thousands of people, and then you wait until you have 100 cases of the virus, right? Positive cases. And then you look, what group is each one of them in?
Can we get to a statistic the other way? Because I think that's easier for people to understand. I think when people say, here, 90% effective, they go, great, if I take this, there's a 90% chance I'm not going to get the virus.
And yes, that is the way to look at it. It's a hard sort of statistical comparison to make. And this is where my mantra on the podcast is science is squishy. You need to embrace the squishy, which is that a scientist does not like to say, here is exactly what you're looking at. Here's exactly what it says. That's just not how scientists tend to talk. They say, maybe it looks like this. This is statistically significant.
Those of us in the legal community, thank you, by the way, because I can put any scientific expert on the stand, and say, look at the O.J. Simpson trial. You know, people were not familiar with DNA testing back then as well. And you had somebody, a DNA expert, up on the stand, and they were asked, is it possible that the DNA found at this site that matches Mr. Simpson could have come from somebody else? And I think it was like a 1 in 12 billion chance or something. So instead of saying, yes, but you'd have to go to another galaxy and find another Earth to make that happen, they had to say, I can't rule it out.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So, and that's exactly what it is, right? So scientists just can't say 100% because until an event happens, you don't know that it'll happen in science.